Namaskar. Ordinary word is very powerful. If the word ordinary is being rightly understood and described by an extraordinary person, and this kind of situation we are going to face today, we are going to have panel discussion on a book entitled On Defense of the Ordinary. The book is written by Dr. Devnath Pathak. Dr. Devnath Pathak is an associate professor associated with South Asian University, Delhi. So he has written this book. We have five panelists from five different areas. We have senior most journalist, Mr. Prem Shankar Jha. We have uh, Anuradha Shankar, Additional Director General of Police, Madhya Pradesh. We have Professor Abhik Ghosh, Professor of Anthropology, Punjab University, Chandigarh. And we have a jurist, a lawyer from Supreme Court, Mr. Ajay Kumar Thakur. So without wasting our time, I am going to request the author of this book, Dr. Devnath Pathak, to briefly describe what is the scheme of writing this book, the history behind it, the process of writing this book, and what exactly he intended to talk through this book. So please, Mr. Dr. Nath Pathak, please explain, sir.
Thank you, Kailash ji, and I'm thankful to all the colleagues, senior members who are on the panel who have graced this occasion to discuss the book. Looks
Please
like
yeah, please continue.
no, it's nice musical dramatic interruption.
Sorry.
So in a broad sweep, I thought I can just count a few things which are characteristic of this book. And because the book is an outcome of sustained a decade-long engagement as a teacher, as a researcher. So it obviously encompasses a broad range of ideas, out of which I can count a few of them, which will probably give basic familiarity about the book as to what it is trying to do. See, through our training, particularly in university setup, in the course of teaching courses to master's students, to doctoral students, and collaborative research projects and so on and so forth, all of those things that we have been doing. And we read variety of scholars. It seems that we have made the ordinary a subject of analysis, and we have not allowed the ordinary, be it related to people, place, culture, society, even polity, we have not allowed that ordinary to become a source of the way of seeing, the way we try to analyze things. So that has always troubled, would always trouble anybody who would be slightly reflexive in the vocation of teaching, learning, reading, writing, researching. Here I thought that let the domain of ordinary itself begin to dictate a term. This is not completely successful exercise. It cannot be entirely successful exercise because the domain of ordinary is too vast to be encapsulated in a writing which also has to serve certain kind of scholarly purpose. So one can always say that the book is trying to, and with the book the author is also trying to take refuge in the ordinary because of certain kind of personal troubles. But then personal troubles are related to public issues. So there are a variety of issues being counted in this book, starting from childhood, development of personhood, psychoanalytical upbringing, and the vocation of teaching, learning, so on and so forth, and living in a society which is by and large polarized, so polarized that we do not recognize the fact that ordinarily we tend to enjoy variety of stories. Ordinarily, we are willing to listen to various accounts of one or maybe more than one events. But then in a polarized society, probably we forget this basic ordinary aptitude of humankind. So this book tries to get into that realm of ordinary and receive things from there, which may be counter, uh, running counter to one another, which means that in the realm of ordinary about anything, we hear variety of discourses, various kind of narratives and counter narratives being projected as one and the same. However, we can, at intellectual level, we try to distinguish one from the other. That is the messy world of the ordinary, which is allowed to have a say through the discourse in this book, available in this book. Um, Having said that, it is also to establish a fact that reasoning, intellectual reasoning, or if we can simply say thinking, is not necessarily an exercise performed only by the accomplished scholars slash experts of any kind. It is also ordinarily performed by lay people, no matter how messy and incoherent it may look. But then ordinary realm also has its own reason with which it operates. At times, these reasons of the ordinary world are colored by a variety of emotions. So, whatever we call consider reasonable coming from the domain of ordinary might appear very melodramatic, in which truth and lie coalesce, merge so dramatically that it becomes very difficult to segregate them. So that's the phenomena which I try to address in this book. Many kind of supports I have taken without making too many citations, which is very habitual of scholars when they do writing. We try to hide behind citations. We try to hide behind conceptual and theoretical and philosophical hideouts, so to say. Those things are avoided primarily because I wished the ordinary experiences, which are very embodied, very lived in nature, to emerge as the central protagonist in the discourse. Uh, that's another thing. And secondly, the kind of sources which inform this kind of work is something like a forgotten uh, uh, treatise we know as Lokayata. Charvak's Lokayata is now by and large reduced into certain kind of basic dictum. Whenever we have to tease someone who is too much into consumption, formless consumption, we say that, you know what, he or she is almost like living with Charvaka's ideology. But then, if we indulge ourselves in the details of Charvaka's ideology, we begin to recognize that there was a method of discussing things from a very pragmatic and also more or less ordinary perspective in the Charvaka philosophy. So the fragments of Charvaka philosophy put together by certain scholars inform us that Charvaka's Vitandavad, which is prior to Hegel's dialectic, Charvaka's Vitandavad is actually a living cultural reality. If you go to Bengal, you see the culture of Addabazi is still alive, and likewise, several cultural equivalent of Addabazi you will see across South Asia. And what happens in those Addabazis? Variety of perspectives emerge, and everybody enjoys those various perspectives, even though there would be agreement and strong disagreement expressed about them, right? So that kind of Lokayata Vitanda path is being employed here to understand as to how ordinary unfolds in day-to-day life. And it unfolds in such a manner, it is so close to us that many a times it escapes our intellectual attention. It is left for someone to come and really pay a great deal of attention and ruminate about it. So the book is trying to ruminate about it. So one I mentioned is Lokayata's Vitandavad, which helps in dealing with the ordinary, which is very messy, which is the realm of embodied experience, which is the realm of lived experience, and therefore that is the domain where the self of the knower or the seeker of knowledge and the rest of the society cannot be separated, which has been the case in most of the social sciences, modern social sciences throughout the world, where we see that the self of the researcher will be separated from the subject of the study. And here, when we talk of ordinary, be it from Lokayata perspective or another perspective, which is very central throughout the book, and that comes from a modern Maithili literature whose name is almost household name even now in Maithili speaking region in northeastern part of Bihar and middle land of Nepal, and that name is of Hari Mohan Jha, who created a character called Khattar Kaka in 1940s, in the decade of 1940s, and through Khattar Kaka, he tries to express some of these lokayatic perspective on various kind of established socio-religious normative order of Hindu society. He tries to destabilize that order so as the variety of narratives could emerge, right? So that also comes by the way of helping this deliberation on ordinary's book. Now, with these kind of instruments, with these kind of tools and conceptual apparatus, which is very less like conceptual apparatus, the book tries to dissect personhood, which means the making of a person in a society. And that personhood can emerge in relation with child rearing, no matter how much of sleepless nights are involved. We also realize as parents that child rearing gives us an opportunity to become a growing child once again. As a parent, we grow up with the children, and that is the beginning of the making of personhood of a parent, as much as it is the beginning of making of personhood for the children. And then it goes on discussing adolescence, youths, the culture of protest in youths. It also tries to suggest that we are ordinarily wired in such a manner, culturally brought up in such a manner that we have no other choice. We have to protest. If we want to realize our personhood, we have to express our strong disagreements at times. And it would be necessary also to go into the street and do all sorts of things. Maybe it is short-lived kind of ideological slogan shouting, but that too becomes a central component of the personhood. Then it goes on to discuss certain kind of threats to this very ordinary kind of upbringing that everybody goes through. These threats would come from industries of various kinds. It could be cosmetic industry, it could be entertainment, and industries which have created the opportunity for mediated personhood these days. It is entirely mediatized society in which no personhood is immune to mediations coming from outside, right? So the kind of threats we receive, the kind of challenges that we receive from the outside world, and along with those challenges too, the ordinariness of the person does not die. We return to the question of death toward the end of the book, and that is the last chapter of the book, where we begin to realize that no matter how long we live, we always imagine a very culturally nuanced kind of death. We have an ideal imagination of an ideal death always there. Even though we have become mediatized, we want certain kind of mythology of related to death, which will help us die properly. And that also makes throughout the book there are several provocative arguments. And one of the key arguments is that we have not had very good sex education, which could address the ordinary instinctual upbringing or personhood of humanity on one hand. On the other hand, we also not have had good death education, which can enhance the quality of our lives, right? So there is a lot of industrial influence which will make us very good consumers, but they don't prepare us to die the way we imagine a good death for ourselves. So I can go on talking about the book, but this is in brief, which I thought I should share with the honorable panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dev. You have explained the things. Now our panelists and also our viewers understand what exactly you have talked and described in your book. So now may I request Professor Abhi Ghosh to give his opinion because he has read it. And as we know, Professor Abhi Ghosh teaches anthropology at Punjab University. So Professor Abhi Ghosh, please. Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
I'm very grateful to the organizers for having invited me here. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Please
Yes.
continue.
Okay. So, and I'm also very grateful for another reason was that I was able to go through a very important, I think, a very significant work which has much to think about, much to talk about, much to discuss. And I think uh, not just this one, but many more such discussions. And as he was saying, many more such addas are possible related to this book, sometimes tangentially and sometimes conversationally about many issues that he has uncovered and that he has put through. Some thoughts struck me in my rapid reading of the book. One of them was that the concept of the ordinary impinges or overlaps on other concepts like that of, for instance, existentialism. And for this, I would refer to Sartre's Being and Nothingness, Merleau-Ponty's Phenomenology of Perception, and so on. Also, secondly, it impinges on the concept of everyday life to a large extent. And here I would like to refer to Berger and Luckman as well as Schutz's concepts of everyday life. And thirdly, the concept of eventiments, a concept put forth by Marshall Salins, uh, especially in Islands of History, where he talks of Captain Cook's visit to the Pacific Islands. Now, all of these often show a disjuncture between the act and the thought. There is an act and there is a thinking about the act. And there are many neurologists who think that the logic for performing the act sometimes comes later, or rather, often comes later. Whatever be the case, uh, we can see this happening with nothingness and being in the case of Sartre, where there is a literal chasm, a gap between what is happening right now, the ordinariness of things, and the other meanings that creep in into that ordinary event or the act that happens. Also, the idea of the ordinary impinges on the query of what is spontaneity? Is it part of the ordinary, really, as we tend to believe, or as the definition seems to state it is? Or is it also part of the different and various meanings that are imbued in that act? And as we think about it, we tend to think of a possible method or way of acting. I think all of these things can be discussed. In all these cases, there is a wish involved, a kind of idea of wishing, a wish that certain elements from the environment, whether it is circumstance history, relations, or culture do not impinge on the act. The conceptualization also wishes that some things from these elements do impinge on the act. So the wishes are those of the subject or the author. In it may or may not resonate with the other, the outsider, the reader. Also, the intersubjectivity or use of others' experiences can only partly tell us what is going on. For instance, the use of the examples of Bhojpuri or the fact of the author being Maithili or me being Bengali. In my case, the use of the example of the baby was also to bridge the subjective intersubjective gap, to bring in people into one's world of ideas. The author speaks of Descartes and the bowls with equal care and honesty to show where these elements can combine together, can join together. And I find these extremely interesting. Because our readings can be very, very different. Excuse my reading of the this work, of this book, or the particular form of intersubjectivity that I became prone towards after having read through it. The essays or chapters read like a litany of angst or a tirade against the current trends in life, appropriate for a pandemic lockdown reflective mode. While subscribing to many of these moments of angst and the causes underlying them, I feel transported, sometimes against my will, into a world of the ordinary as typically visualized and described by the author. As a mode of discussion here, or as a mode of academic process of consumption that is created also through this book, there is much to think and reflect upon in this tome. I hope that this discussion and our readings would be fulfilled or fruitful to all of us, and the learning becomes a part of the ordinary that the author has so evocatively portrayed. Thank you. I think that is
Please.
all I would like to say for the time being. Perhaps others can add on, and we can have a nice discussion about that.
Thank you, Professor Abhi Ghosh. So now may I request Madam Anuradha Shankar to say something. You know, the purpose of bringing people from different background was to break the concept of, tight disciplinary approach. So it is like, interdisciplinary thing. So with that purpose, we have invited people from various walks of life. So I would request her to please talk about, ma'am.
Thank you, Kailash ji, and I must congratulate the.
Devnath Pathak, Dr. Devnath Pathak.
Oh no, I know the name is right in front of me. I can see that. I'm just trying not to take his name. So I congratulate the writer for a very interesting book. When you pick up a book by Bloomsbury, written by an associate professor of some university, and then you're told that you're supposed to come and speak on it, you do feel out of place. But because it's a book about the ordinary, I suppose you want an ordinary person to speak about it. Because,
Very true, very true.
yeah,
Extraordinary, ordinary.
I know your I know your
Extraordinarily
cunning
ordinary.
plans. No, I know your cunning plans, Kailash bhai.
जी जी.
So here, well, I did a lot. It was an exercise in speed reading. Uh, thank God that the academy taught us to do that, because you gave sent me the book only a couple of days back, and so I'm sorry if I haven't been able to really sit and muse upon it, but I just have done a quick first reading, and I must tell you that it's a very interesting read. And as a reader, I didn't find it difficult to go through it at all. I am more fond of reading. These days, I'm completely busy in reading physics. I do not know why. I have never read physics in my life. But so this was a real relaxation, because there was this Carlo Rovelli's Helgoland in one hand, and then I have your book in the other hand. So it was really interesting. And I would agree with Avik ji that, I wouldn't say it, I didn't look at it as angst, but I did look at it as a kind of flow of memory and a sense of loss. And as you know, when we look at these days, because the ordinary changes almost every moment, and you are from Bihar, the land of Buddha, and you know that he says that what is right now is not the next. So the ordinary changes, and tragically, the ordinary today has become what you have lamented in your book about, and the ordinary is not pleasant, and the ordinary that you recall, that you have in your memory, that you feel a sense of loss for, was a pleasant ordinary, even though you were, stealing prasad from a mazar or a temple, tabaruk from a mazar or prasad from a temple. You were still, enjoying yourself, and there wasn't so much anger, because in those days, gods used to protect people. Nowadays, people protect gods. So,
क्या बात. क्या बात.
the
Great,
reality
great,
is
great.
completely reversed now. And
Yeah.
because the gods have become so vulnerable and they need so much protection,
Yes,
that's
yes.
why there is you have that pain in your heart. And that's why when you talk of Tagore or Gandhi, we can see that's where that angst which Avigji was talking about, it comes out most prominently. I felt that. The other thing which I noted was how you spoke about uh, the the I mean, and this is something which is so frustrating to anyone who wants to be just a scholar teacher and does not want, citations of their so-called works in 10 other works. So for scholar teachers, and I have one in my house right now, I have one retired in Patna, my mother, and my daughter is also a professor. So, and a humanities professor, which is the worst lot these days, if they just want to be a teacher. So, I understood what you were talking about when you were pained about the lack of critical analysis, the lack of critical thinking, the lack of debate, the lack of protests. Because दिल ही तो है ना संगो खिश्त, दर्द से भर ना आए क्यों, है ना? रोएंगे हम हजार बार कोई हमें सताए क्यों. So this rona has been stopped. I mean, your dil is supposed to become sangokhisht now, and that part of your book really touched my heart. And of course, you mentioned Khatar Kaka, and I found it very interesting, because I've been gifting Khatar Kaka to religious people for the last 30 years now. The moment anyone becomes very, talks of religiosity and becomes very traditional, I tell them that there's one book which you should read if you're over 18 years old. You must take it, because the last chapter needs to go to the censor board. So, So I give them that book, and I'm so happy that you've mentioned it many times. Although you say that you're a Maithil, but you haven't employed too much of what in Mithila, the classic style of satire is Vakrokti, and you haven't employed it too much. because there's so much pain and there's so much sense of loss that I think you've just said that, okay, let me just take this out. And it's very interesting. Another thing I wanted to point out was that you have recalled a time which I also can recall. You know, and as a woman, because as a woman, this country has regressed. What I was in my school, what I experienced in my college, despite my being married at that time, in college, in school I wasn't, but it wasn't so early. But what I recall was a more open and happy atmosphere. I like to call it a happy atmosphere, because you could laugh with anyone that you wanted to laugh with. And this is such a terrible turnaround, and it's difficult to fathom how we slid back like that. And there are times I have as Kailash Bhai knows very well, I speak on Mahatma Gandhi and Kasturba at various places. And there's one thing I keep pointing out is that Mahatma Gandhi was the catalyst for women's freedom in India, by pulling them out of their homes and involving them not only in the freedom struggle but in the Charkha movement. The Charkha
Yeah.
movement empowered women economically. In the first time, they actually saw money. My grandmother, my nanny, used to tell me that that was one of the first times that they had actually held money in their own hands. So this was what Gandhi Baba did for women in this country. And it was like, I was discussing with my daughter, and she was telling me it was like it was a tear in the frame of time. And it was like that tear has been repaired 20 or 30 years after independence, and women have slid back into those. I mean, they were the women who were filling the prisons of managed by the British. And we somehow we just slid back into our homes, or even if we did not slide back completely in our homes and took up a career or something, we still became a kind of defensive uh, half of the in Indian society. And that you address when you talk about how consumption is at the center of everything. And when consumption is at the center of everything, then it becomes a power game, and people become secondary to profit. So now we all of us. I mean, the entire discourse is about how India has to become a better economy, but not a better society. Nobody. There's no discourse about society. So we have forgotten that we are a society, and we have become an economy. I mean, there's no problem in being an economy, but that cannot be at the cost of being a society. And I saw that reflected in your musings. I'd like to call it your musings because very free flowing, and it when you jump from one place to another, from. And your best part, which I really enjoyed myself with, was when you talk about cinema. You must write an independent work on cinema. There's a lot there. And whether you're talking about Rashomon or you're talking about Amitabh Bachchan, you have this whole gamut of phraseology, which I really enjoyed very much. I liked your language best when you were talking about cinema. You must do something about that. That's my request for your next book, because now that you've come into this free flow of quasi academic writing, you should remain there, because there are too many people writing academic things. So I really, really enjoyed it. And it was a pleasure reading it very quickly. And I'm going to give it a slow read now once I have more time and at leisure, after a little distance. It's good to get acquainted with someone, and then friendship should be given a little bit of a leeway. So I'll do that. And I loved your, what I should say, your samad in Maithili, your uh, sandesh in Hindi, for the young youth, that they need to understand that they need to talk back. And this talking back, in not in our generation, but in Jha Saheb's generation, they was looking back in anger, wasn't there, sir? You were looking back in anger. But in our generation, we were talking back. But now, talking back is actually learned from Shin-chan or some such very rude Nickelodeon channels. And we haven't understood the meaning of talking back, questioning, the Nachiketa style of constant questioning. We haven't done that, and this has, and because we have made a framework of youth, and we want them to be completely, I mean, we have decided that this is how they should be in India's, progressive, uh, not progressive but progressing India, developing India, and what the youth should be. And we have forgotten that जवानी बेखता बेऐब हो सकती तो है ना? जवानी बेखता बेऐब हो सकती तो है, लेकिन ये जीना भी तो खुद जीने पे एक इल्जाम है साकी.
क्या
So
बात है, क्या
you talk about that. You talk about that. You mentioned that, and it's very well appreciated. Thank you so much for taking your pen to such completely random things. Thank you.
So Dev, Anuradha ma'am has made your day today. So it was a wonderful direction, interpretation of your book, the entire reading. She has been narrated the reader's point of view, how she has viewed being a daughter of Mithila, and being a Gandhian, and being an administrative person, and being a lady, and being, most importantly, being a commoner, the ordinary, so extraordinary thing. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so very much. May I now request my friend, who is a Supreme Court lawyer, Mr. Ajay Kumar Thakur. As I have told you, people from various walks of life. So Ajay is a jurist, a practicing lawyer. So may I request you, Ajay, to give your, point of view, your reading, and how have you viewed this book, please.
Thank you, KK, for inviting me in this panel of discussion. It's really interesting and very insightful to hear all the fellow panelists on the subject. And also excuse me for my bad connectivity, because it might disconnect anytime, because in Noida, I'm in Noida, it might connect anytime. So excuse me if that happens in between. So
Okay.
having said that, on the topic of discussion today, first of all, kudos to Dr. Pathak for having written such a wonderful book and giving insight of the ordinary. See, the ordinary, the word itself is very meaningful. And I will give the other insight of the term ordinary. Ordinary means what? In the legal context, if you say ordinary means somebody who is deprived, somebody who has an issue with system. Why ordinary? Because normally ordinary, they feel they have been left behind the system. They are not the part of the mainstream. They feel deprived in every walk of life, and those are the ones who are marginalized, who have been ignored. Even the government do not look into that, and that is the story of this ordinary. So my whatever little time I could get, definitely I will go through this detail quite in detail. But whatever little time I could have, and I could spare my time, from that I can say that the solution, as a legal person, the solution to that angst is but natural. The angst is natural. The angst of an ordinary person against the system is natural, and that is being portrayed in this book. And why a person? It's not that the legal system is basically, if I say in pure legal terms, uh, everybody has an equal right. Everyone in society have an equal right. So every person, idea, should feel that they are part of the system and justice delivery system is there for them. But for some reason, whatever are the government scheme or the judiciary or whatever, that does not percolate to that particular section of the society, and that leads to this type of discord. and that is the story which is being portrayed. Apart from that, I cannot say anything more. But law is there to. I can only assure that law is there to protect everyone, although they may feel marginalized. But a very insightful, very thought-provoking, and a very well-researched uh, uh, book that we have that I have come across for since long time. So, having said that, I would like to again congratulate Dr. Pathak for this wonderful book, and we will have one-to-one interaction at some point of time. But before parting, I must say that since Khatar Kaka has already been mentioned in your in this webinar, so I must say that I also belong to the same place, and I do connect to Khatar Kaka and his interesting stories that we have come across as a child, and some of them we still remember, and we hold good memory of that, and we'll continue to hold it till we are alive. So thank you very much, Dr. Pathak, and thank you, Kailash, for inviting me, and thank you, Dr. Jha, and Mr.
Enjoyed hearing you.
And Madam and Mr. Amish. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ajay. We can understand the problem. Sometimes technology troubles a lot, and that makes us really helpless. So I can understand
No,
you.
but right now I have a very poor connectivity.
I can, I can, I can, I
been
can.
able to manage to connect.
Connectivity is the part. Connectivity is the part of technology. It is the disease that technology is facing with.
But then,
Anyway,
as a lawyer, we have become used to all this because
yeah.
these days even the courts are virtual, so we are quite
Okay.
used to this technical
Fair,
snag in between. So
fair
nothing
enough.
to worry
So,
about.
fair enough, Ajay Thakur. So may I now request Honorable Prem Shankar Jha, the famous journalist, human rights activist, and he is talking on so many things. He has written so many thick books on various things, including on Kashmir. So, sir, now we request you to please you explain us as the chairman of the session, and I'm very cruel with you because I have not given you sufficient time to read it. But whatever you have done, please.
First of all, Kailash, it is not your fault because I left India several
Yes.
days ago, about almost a week ago, and your book, you sent it at the last minute, and it obviously is in Delhi, but it hasn't got to me. But it doesn't matter. I've listened to 4 very diverse and very enlightening um, reactions and explanations of what's in the book. I would personally have liked, but I don't think we have time for it. We don't need it anymore. At the start, just a kind of a description from the author of what he means by the ordinary and how he has structured the book. That if that had come through, or you could even say it afterwards briefly if you like, it would help. But from what I gathered about what you said, I think that I think that this is a book that's much needed. It's a book needed for this time, because what is the from let me tell you what is my concept of the ordinary. Or an ordinary situation is a diverse situation. Ordinariness is diversity. And let me give you a very simple example. If you look at an ordinary field of grass, it'll have 1,000 different varieties of plants growing in it. I mean, just a wild field in the countryside. Um, you don't even notice it. You notice it when the entire field is under a wonderful crop of rice or wheat, which is sort of waving in the winds. You know it's going to feed so many people. But that's not ordinary. That is special. It's been created. It's been created by destroying the ordinary.
Sure.
So to me, the most important thing about ordinariness is that it is diversity. It is in defense of the ordinary, is a defense of diversity. And diversity means if there are 5 million varieties, I'm not a biologist, but 50 million varieties of animals, insects, plants, etc. If they all coexist in one ecosystem, that is because of they tolerate each other, and those that don't manage, there are predators, but also the predatory behavior is within a limit. It's kept within a limit by other by natural defenses that develop against it, or by counter attacks from strangest situations, often from herbs, often from insects. But therefore, it's a balance created and maintained in extraordinary diversity, and that truly requires freedom. So, in defense of the ordinary, true is the, to me, the very concept is defense of freedom. Now, I want to jump from that. I don't need to say that tell you, all of you particularly, हम सब एक प्रांत के छी और एक भाषा में बजे छी पर
क्या बात है।
भाषा मतलब एक ही ना। अच्छा, चलो चलो हम अंग्रेजी में फिर बजना शुरू करा। क्या हमरा वो शब्द सब में अभी ना तो हिंदी में ना मैथिली में। So coming back to, to English, what I want to say is that what what I'm worried about in our country today is the destruction of the ordinary that's taking place, and the destruction is taking place in two places. One we've talked about, and also which I think we could. I'm sure there's a lot of it in the book, which is the 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 impact of media and the manipulation of the media in order to give us a sense of what we should be thinking, what we should not be thinking, what right, what is wrong, above all, what is good, what is bad, what is politically acceptable, what is politically not acceptable. That kind of duality has been created, and large numbers of us, anyone who disagrees from his duality or wants to get out of it, is in some way a target, and is definitely, even if it's not created as a target, he becomes considered inferior. Now, the other to some extent, if you look at this, the rise of ideology in politics and ideology in economics, it's just as strong there. I mean, first we had state planning, which pretty well killed our economy for 30 years because it's so badly bungled, and there was so much, just a sort of, what should I call it? So much um, uh,
Red tapeism, you know?
so much stolen pride in the planners, unjustified. That's, there's a single word for which I'm not able to find, but you get what I mean. But then, of course, we have had the neoliberal philosophy, which has completely destroyed the last 15 years of, everything after 2008, 2009. Not here, but also all over the world. But politically, also, we have had that happen. We're seeing it today in our country, where you can you go to jail if you say that you don't like a leader, and there are hundreds of journalists who have suffered this already. But apart from this business of trying to create a single rice field out of the whole of India, you know, the something is the ground for this has been prepared by our education system, and this is what I wanted to say, something which may be different, may not even be touched on in the book. The most important thing is that we have an educational system now where particularly in the secondary school stage, which is actually the most important, because it's the time when the student is most impressionable, and yet at the same time capable of absorbing and digesting the impressions. Earlier, you'll be more impressionable if you can't digest. Beyond, afterwards, you created your personality, and you're able to sift what impressions you want to keep and what you don't want to keep. don't want to keep. But this is a period, this 7 8 years, which you're both impressionable and vulnerable. And in this time, we have created an education system in which let's look at some figures that you have more than 1 million people, 1.3 million people sit for the 10+2 examination. The results are given in 4 weeks, 5 weeks. They have to be ready. How many examiners do you need for that? I made a calculation that comes to about 400,000 examiners, because according to the government itself, they expect you to do 25 examiners to do 25 papers per day. If they do more, they do more. But then many do because they want to make more money. But the point is, it doesn't improve the quality of examining. But the question, if you have, if in any one subject you have even say 50,000 examiners, or 10,000 examiners, or 1,000 examiners, how do you maintain a common standard of of marking, which is equitable to everybody? This problem we have not resolved, and all that we have done is we have actually simplified and robotized the question papers to a point where it is impossible to think outside a tiny box that has been set by your so-called model answer. Now, this has been going on not for a few years. The 10+2, etc., came in 40 years ago. And for the last 40 years, two generations, full generations, and actually 20 years of classes, 40 years of classes have come out facing this, being told that if you write 6 points in answer to somewhere where the model requires only 5 points, you will lose. You will not gain. This kind of pressure upon us for to conform is at the root of the destruction of what there is. I just want to stop there. Thank you very much for listening to me and for calling me to your talk.
Thank you, sir. It was very powerful intervention, and your word was very meaningful. Now, Dave, as you are the author of the book, so if anything you want to clarify and you have to say quickly, if you can say in 2 3 minutes, so it would be nice before I sum up.
I am genuinely grateful to everyone for making these very nuanced observation about the book. I mean, I am overwhelmed actually by the way you have taken up the kind of discussion that the book is offering. If I put together some of these observations, probably I will address one very important point. Sri Prem Shankar Jha, who we have been reading since our childhood in newspapers and periodicals, has very rightly observed, and the book also gets into the mode of talking about the threats to that diversity which is inherent in the ordinary. Ordinary is that's what I tried suggesting when I said that there are arguments and counter arguments that we hear, that itself reflects the way ordinary is inherently diverse. However, it may also have certain kind of inherent tendencies to oppress us and to not let us be ourselves. In spite of that, we find that there are those possibilities within the realm of ordinary which will offer us liberation of some sort from one level of ordinariness to another level of ordinariness. Without Professor Ghosh, you are right that there are conceptual resonance of some of those scholars and their works that you have referred to, philosophers, anthropologists. There are resonance of those in the book, but then I consciously decided not to take those routes which are more familiar to us, and instead I maintained that the things which are coming from the realm of ordinary, they themselves will offer us, even though we are crying, we are lamenting, we are very acrimonious, we are very unhappy, dissatisfied, but they offer us opportunity to reason with things, and then by reasoning with those things, we find what I tend to call everyday awakenings. It is not a grand package of moksha. It's a smaller package of everyday awakening if we allow ourselves to listen to those voices, diverse voices coming from the realm of ordinary. It is actually an exercise in freedom. I totally agree with you. Uh, I mean, I am informed by the kind of writings you have done, and we have. I mean, we cannot forget our days when we used to debate, uh, basing upon what you used to write in periodicals and those articles in Frontline and Hindu. So yes, it is an act in freedom. There are those attempts to scuttle our freedom, but the moment we begin to realize that, if I stay ordinary and tend to be critical about everything around me, that moment itself, my uh, small package of everyday awakening begins. And if I am ambitious enough to allow this everyday awakening to unfold furthermore, there will be sustainability of my freedom. I totally agree that the system of education from school to university has done a great deal of damage. Like other industries, education industries too has done a great deal of damage. But the icing on the cake, the observation made by Anuradha Shankarji is like really, it has touched my heart. You are not at all outsider. Whatever you have said is far more meaningful than many of the philosophers or seasoned anthropologists in universities will say. You're very right that it is through this act of lamentation that we can express ourselves, and that is also necessary. To stay ordinary is also necessary, to not shy away from saying that, what, I'm not liking this is not very good for me, and then explore the possibility of something which will appear better for me, which will appear saner to me. So I'm thankful to the whole panel, and with that I will rest my case.
There are multiple ordinary things in Anuradha Shankar personality. She is a teacher. She is an able administrator. She is a Gandhian. And most importantly, she is an ordinary person. And that makes her extraordinary.
Well said.
That makes her extraordinary. So you're all, we were very, enchanted with your word. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Honorable Prem Shankar Jhaji. Thank you, Anuradha ma'am, Anuradha Behenji. Thank you, Professor Abhi Ghosh. Thank you, Ajay in absentia. And thank you, uh, Dave, for writing such a wonderful book. But one request you have already received. You
Yeah.
can take it as a command from an elder sister. You have
Yes.
to write a book on
Yeah.
Indian cinema, and characters and all that. And we'll all sit together and discuss on that book also. With this, thank you everybody.
Thank you.
And thank you. Bye bye. Good night. Take care. Thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.